Hey there, Lewis All-Stars. It's Miss Minahan and her mini hands. And this week on The Wild Robot Escapes, we are going to finish the book. So all of our questions about Roz, about Brightbill, about Hilltop Farm, all of those questions will be answered this week. I am super excited to finish the book, and I hope you are too. Let's get started. Chapter 73, The Pigeons. In the very heart of the city was a great swath of greenery, the old park. It had rolling lawns and flower gardens and dense wooded areas. It had lakes and ponds and fountains. It had playgrounds and benches and miles of cobblestone pathways. It also had pigeons. Thousands and thousands of pigeons. The city pigeons witnessed things you wouldn't believe. Nothing shocked them. They certainly weren't shocked by robots. So when Roz marched into the middle of the park, the pigeons there weren't troubled in the least. She approached a flock that was about 100 birds strong, all cooing and strutting across the cobblestones as if they owned the place. But as Roz stomped closer and closer, the pigeons scuttled out of the way to let her pass by. However, Roz didn't pass by. She stopped and glanced around, and when she saw that she was alone with the pigeons, she started speaking to them in the language of the animals. "Hello, pigeons. My name is Roz." The pigeons cocked their heads, which meant, "Is this robot actually speaking to us?" "Yes, I am actually speaking to you," continued Roz. "I am searching for my son. He is a goose named Brightbill. Have you seen him?" For the first time in a long time, the pigeons were shocked. Several of them fluttered away from the talking robot, but most were too curious to leave. One pigeon was so curious that she strutted out from the flock and right up to the robot. "Let me get this straight," said the curious pigeon. "Your name's Roz, and you've got a son named Brightbill who's a goose?" "That is correct." "I can't believe it!" The pigeon flapped her wings and turned to the others. "You guys, this is Roz from Graybeak's Stories, remember?" The flock began cooing excitedly. "You have heard of Graybeak," said Roz. "Everyone's heard of Graybeak," said the pigeon. "A while back she started telling stories about a goose whose mother was some kind of wild robot. We all thought she was joking, but I guess not." "She was not joking," said Roz. "But I have lost my son, and I do not know how to find him. Perhaps Graybeak could help. Do you know where she is?" "I hate to tell you this, Roz, but Graybeak is dead." The birds all lowered their heads. "You know, life ain't easy for us pigeons. We only live a few years out here, if we're lucky. But we were especially sad when we lost Graybeak. She was one of the best." The others cooed in agreement. "I am sorry for your loss," said Roz. "I wish I had gotten to meet Graybeak. My son was very fond of her." The pigeon gazed up at the robot with a steely look in her eye. "Any friend of Graybeak is a friend of ours. If Brightbill is lost, we're going to find him." She turned to the others. "You heard me. Flock, hit the skies and tell every pigeon you see to start searching for a goose named Brightbill." At those words, the flock erupted into flight. Only the robot and the curious pigeon remained. "By the way, they call me Strutter," said the pigeon, fluffing out her chest feathers. "It is very nice to meet you, Strutter," said the robot. "Thank you for searching for Brightbill. What can I do to help?" "You can help by staying put. I want you in this park when we return with your son. Don't hide or wander off and make us go searching for you, too." "Oh, and another thing," Strutter added. "Stay away from the park ranger robot. He spends most of his time taking care of the grounds, but he's always on the lookout for troublemakers." The pigeon gave a quick salute to the robot, then she joined the search for Brightbill. Chapter 74, The Sky. Hours passed and the sun set in the west. More hours passed, and the eastern sky began to glow. Roz spent that whole night in the park, waiting for Strutter to return with Brightbill, but there was no sign of them. In fact, There weren't any birds in the park at all. Roz couldn't let those thoughts distract her. She needed to stay alert. The park ranger robot had seen her once or twice already, and now she heard his footsteps wherever she went. Was the park ranger following Roz? Had he noticed our robot's unit number? Would he report her to the Ricos? Roz took a pathway into the woods, trying to escape the ranger's view. And that's when she heard familiar voices calling from the sky. "Where are you, Ma?" said Brightbill. "Come on out, Roz," said Strutter. Roz turned toward the voices but saw only leaves and branches. Brightbill and Strutter were flying somewhere above the woods. She wanted to call back to them, but the park ranger was still trailing her. Instead, she followed the sounds of their voices as they glided over the treetops. But then there came a new sound, a buzzing sound. It grew louder and closer. Air started blasting down from the sky, and when Roz looked up, she saw a white, triangular airship floating above her. Chapter 75, The Ricos. 3 robots zipped down from the airship on cables. The ground shook as their heavy feet slammed against the cobblestones. Then they stood side by side, forming a wall, with their eyes locked on Roz. They were Rico 4, Rico 5, and Rico 6. "Hello, Rosum Unit 7134. We are the Ricos. Please come with us." The robotic voice belonged to Rico 4. He and his partners waited for their target to come forward. But Roz didn't move. She knew how dangerous the Ricos could be, and so did her son. From somewhere in the sky, Brightbill's frightened voice cried out, "Run, Mama, run!" So Roz ran. She dashed up the pathway and leaped into the woods. Without crunching a weed, without rustling a leaf, the robot vanished into the thick foliage. The Ricos weren't concerned. They had other ways of tracking her. Or so they thought. Their blocky heads swiveled from side to side, scanning the woods for Roz's electronic signal. They scanned and scanned and scanned, but they found no trace of their target. Chapter 76, The Morning. A steady stream of foot traffic was flowing past the park that morning. Several pairs of eyes noticed a Rosum robot running out from the trees. They watched as she looked around and then started marching along the sidewalk with the rest of the crowd. Roz had lost the Ricos back in the woods, but she knew they wouldn't stop searching for her. She needed to blend in with the normal robots on the street. So when she came upon a work crew marching toward a construction site, she tried to join the end of the line. But the crew immediately halted and turned to face her. One robot stepped backward, away from the crew, and bumped into a young woman. "I am sorry," said Roz, gently grasping the woman's shoulder. "Get your hands off me! Whose robot is this? There's something wrong with her!" Everyone stopped and stared. Humans pointed. Automobiles slowed. There were whispers about a defective robot on the loose. And then the white triangular ship appeared. It floated out from between tall buildings and headed for our robot. Roz lurched forward and backward again and again, trying to think of a plan, until a voice suddenly squawked behind her. "Follow us, Mama!" Brightbill and Strutter swooped past, and the robot went racing after them. She wove through the crowd, sprinted down streets, leaped across intersections. Horns blared, and humans screamed, and robots shuffled out of the way. The birds made one last turn and fluttered into a narrow side street. A group of tomcats were there, lurking in the shadows. They crouched and licked their lips and dreamed of feasting on the goose and the pigeon. Then the robot came stomping up, and the cats hissed and scattered in every direction. Strutter pointed to a heavy, circular panel set in the pavement and said, "Lift that up." Roz lifted the panel. Beneath it was a ladder that descended into a deep, dark hole. "Climb down there," said Strutter. "A friend of mine is expecting you." The robot looked from the pigeon to the goose. "Do what she says, Ma!" cried Brightbill. "There's no time to waste." "But how will I find you again?" said Roz. "Just go." Chapter 77, The Underground. Our robot was standing in a long, shadowy tunnel. Murky water trickled along the floor, and sour smells filled the air. Roz was below ground, in the city sewers. There was a squeak, and the robot's headlights flashed onto a crack in the wall. A rat's pointy face poked out. "You must be Roz," said the rat, wiggling his nose. "I hear you're in trouble." "That is correct," said the robot. "I need to get as far from here as possible." "I know where to take you," said the rat, as he started scampering down the tunnel. The rat knew the sewers better than anyone, but his short legs couldn't carry him very fast. So Roz carried him. She scooped him up, plopped him on her shoulder, and said, "Tell me where to run." With the rat squeaking directions in her ear, Roz stomped deeper into the underground. She splashed down side tunnels, crawled through narrow passageways, carefully crossed subway tracks. Occasionally, they came upon cavernous chambers. Most of the chambers were empty, but some contained jumbles of pipes. The rat would scurry across the damp, dirty floor, while the robot climbed the pipes as if they were trees. Mechanical sounds echoed out from some of the tunnels. Robot crews were hard at work. They spent their lives laboring below the city. Many would never even see the light of day. Roz was curious, of course, but she dared not spy on them. Those workers had no idea that a fellow robot was sneaking through their underground home. After traveling through miles of tunnels, the rat and the robot came to a dead end. A ladder was bolted to the wall and disappeared into a hole in the ceiling. "I don't know what you'll find up there," squeaked the rat, "but good luck." "It cannot be any worse than where I was," said Roz, placing him on the ground. "Thank you for your help." The robot gave the rat a quick scratch behind the ears, and then she climbed up to the street. Chapter 78, The Chase. The street was empty. No people walking, no robots working, no automobiles driving. Roz looked to the sky, hoping to see Brightbill or Strutter, but what she saw was a fleet of white triangular airships. They were floating over the city, searching for the runaway robot, and they had just spotted her. "Rosum, Unit 7134, do not move." 3 robots zipped down from a ship on cables. They were Rico's 10, 11, and 12. Each held a rifle at his side, but they didn't fire their weapons. Not yet. Their orders were to retrieve the target unharmed, if possible. Our robot's survival instincts blared like sirens in her head, and she burst away from the Ricos. She sprinted down the empty street and turned onto another empty street. All the streets seemed to be empty, but they wouldn't be empty for long. More and more big, bulky robots came zipping down to join the chase. The Ricos moved like machines. Their target moved like an animal. The wild robot stayed low, gliding across the streets, darting around buildings, vanishing into the shadows. Her computer brain thought back to those games of hide-and-seek she had played on the farm. But this was no game. Roz never should have gone into that alley. She was halfway through it when Ricos appeared at both ends. There was only one direction to go. Using all the strength in her legs, our robot launched herself high into the air, and she clamped onto the side of a building. Frightened faces peered out from a window, but Roz didn't want to frighten anyone. She just wanted to go home. The robot launched herself up and across the alley and clamped onto the opposite building. Back and forth she went, leaping between the buildings, climbing higher and higher until she landed on a flat, lofty rooftop. The sky was filled with white airships. All at once, the ships turned toward Roz. Their engines buzzed as they closed in on our robot. But then came a strange swishing noise. Pigeons! Hundreds of them. Thousands of them. Wave upon wave of pigeons streamed up from the streets and swarmed around the airships. Strutter had rallied her friends from every corner of the city. They had always hated airships, buzzing loudly, crowding the skies, forcing the birds to fly low. And now a city's worth of pigeons were finally unleashing their anger. As you'd expect, the airships fought back. Blazing beams of light flickered across the skyline and left charred feathers floating on the breeze. But the pigeons didn't retreat. They tightened around the ships, distracting them, confusing them. There was a deafening screech. Little bodies fell, and a ship spiraled out of sight, leaving a trail of smoke behind it. Roz watched in horror as more pigeons and ships went down. She hollered for the birds to fly away, but they were lost in a fighting frenzy. Heavy feet thumped onto the roof. Rozum, Unit 7, 1, 3, 4, do not move. Roz didn't look. She just ran from the voice, leaped to the next rooftop, and kept on running. Our robot leaped up to a higher rooftop and then down to a lower one. Up and down she went, leaping from building to building, footsteps thundering behind her. But still, the Ricos did not fire their rifles. "Mama, I'm here!" Brightbill swooped alongside his mother as she ran. "What should we do?" "Brightbill, you must fly to safety," hollered Roz. "It is too dangerous up here." And then in a Oops, that's not what she's saying. And then in a softer voice, the robot said, "I cannot escape." "No, Mama, you've come so far. Don't give up now." But Roz was finished running. She slowed and stopped at the edge of the rooftop. The goose fluttered into her arms, and our friends held each other close. "You have been such a good son," said Roz. "You have saved my life so many times, but now you must save yourself and go on without me." "Will I see you again?" said Brightbill, wiping his eyes. "I do not think so," said Roz. They still had so much to say to each other. There simply wasn't any more time. So they said the only words that really mattered. "I love you, Mama." "I love you, son." Airships circled above. Ricos dropped onto rooftops. Rifles pointed at our robot. A voice boomed. "Rozum, Unit 7, 1, 3, 4, do not move." But Roz did move. She heaved her son toward the sky so that he could fly to safety, and in that instant a trigger was pulled. A blazing beam of light flashed onto our robot's leg. Damage sensors flared as the leg turned bright orange and melted away. Poor Roz tried to keep her balance, but she was already toppling backward, off the roof. She seemed to hang in the air, sparkling in the sunlight, and then she fell. Down, 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 to the street below. As Roz was falling, she took one last look at Brightbill, soaring in the sky above. She watched him get smaller and smaller. Then everything suddenly went dark. Chapter 79, The Designer. Roz awoke slowly. She was surprised to be waking up at all. The fall from that building should have destroyed her, and yet here she was. But where was she? Everything was dark and silent. Was this where robots go when they die? No. As her systems activated, the real world came into focus. She saw white walls and floors, and she heard the hum of machinery in the background. Roz was somewhere inside the robot factory where she had been made. A pile of robot parts lay on the floor. The parts were smashed and mangled. It took a moment for Roz to realize she was looking down at her own broken body. It took another moment for her to realize she was now nothing more than a robotic head. Her head was sitting atop an electric box that powered her computer brain. Roz still had her thoughts in her voice, but without a body, she couldn't move. So she sat there, completely helpless, and waited for the makers to appear. The makers did not appear. Instead, Roz heard soft footsteps, and an old woman appeared. She was elegant, with white hair and red lipstick and black clothes. Flowery perfume wafted up behind her. Every detail about the woman was neat and precise, except for her fingers, which were smudged with dark grease. "Welcome back, Roz," said the woman, wiping her hands on a rug. "I wasn't sure I'd get your computer brain working again. You took quite a spill out there. How do you feel?" Roz just stared. "You don't have to pretend anymore," said the woman. "I know you're not a normal robot. Everyone knows. You made that perfectly clear when you led the Ricos on that wild chase through the city." Roz remained silent. "I watched the video of the chase. I don't know how you got those pigeons to attack our airship, but I'm more interested in the goose. You seem to be speaking with it. Can you explain this to me?" "The goose is my son," said Roz at last. "Is that so?" The woman arched an eyebrow. "Roz, I repaired your computer brain so I could talk with you. I want to know how you came to be this way. So let's talk. I'll begin by introducing myself. My name is Dr. Malovo. A long time ago, I fell in love with computers and robots, and I created a company called Tech Lab Industries. Since then, millions of robots have been produced right here in this factory, and I've designed every last one of them. Dr. Malovo leaned forward. "Roz, I designed you." Chapter 80, The Beautiful Glitch. Deep inside the robot factory, Dr. Malovo was sitting with Roz in Unit 7134. Roz was now just a robotic head, but for the moment, her head was all she needed. The robot and the designer had many questions for each other, and they sat there for hours, having conversations like these. "What happened to you on that island?" said Dr. Malovo. "Tell me everything." The robot told her everything. She described how she awoke on a rocky shore and how her only desire was to survive and how difficult life was in that harsh place. "To survive in the wild, I had to become wild," said Roz. "So I studied the wild animals, I mimicked their behavior, and eventually I learned to speak their language." "Incredible," said Dr. Malovo. "You're programmed to learn different languages, and you're programmed to work with animals, but I never imagined you could learn to speak with animals." "Although I could speak to the animals, they still did not trust me," said Roz. "So I tried to win them over with kindness. Animals ran from me and laughed at me and attacked me, and I always responded with kindness. It was a good strategy, but the real key to my survival came in the form of a gosling. When I adopted Brightbill, everything changed. I was finally accepted by the humans. I was surrounded by friends and family. I was home." "Am I the only wild robot?" said Roz. "I don't know," said Dr. Malovo. "Many defective robots have been returned over the years. It's possible some were like you, unless we destroyed them." "Will you destroy me?" The woman sighed. "Roz, people are afraid of you. They saw you fleeing through the city and think you're dangerous. They want to know the danger is gone. And so, when we're finished speaking, I'll have to destroy you." "I am not dangerous," said the robot. "That part of my programming has never failed. Even if I wanted to be violent, I could not." "Have you ever wanted to be violent?" "No, every problem has a peaceful solution. Violence is unnecessary." "I wish it were that simple," said Dr. Malovo. "It's an amazing time to be alive, but there is still crime, there are still wars. Sometimes violence is unavoidable." "Is that why you have the Ricos?" said Roz. "The Ricos are designed to do all sorts of unpleasant jobs. Some of those jobs require the use of force." "Do you ever worry they might use force against you?" "The Ricos have never given me a single reason to worry," said Dr. Malovo. "But you have." "How did you escape from Hilltop Farm?" said Dr. Malovo, leaning forward. Roz didn't answer. Let me guess. The children helped. Roz just stared. They're not in any trouble. If I were them, I'd have helped you too. They are good children, said Roz finally. And yet you left them, said Dr. Malovo. Leaving was not easy. I care about everyone on Hilltop Farm, and I did my best to look after them all. But I did not belong there, and when the children discovered who I really was, they agreed. They wanted me to go home, so they helped me escape. Why do I fear water? Why am I female? Why was my body designed this way? Why does my computer brain know some things and not others? Why? Dr. Malovo laughed. Why do you need all these answers? You programmed me to learn, said Roz. I am simply trying to learn about myself. The woman shifted in her seat. Those questions are more complicated than you realize. There are countless little considerations that go into designing any robot. I have to determine the robot's size and strength and appearance. I have to give the robot the proper programming and computer brain. I have to predict how people will react to the robot. I have to imagine everything that could possibly go wrong, but all my decisions are guided by a single question. What is the robot's purpose? Quietly, Roz asked her designer, What is my purpose? I'm sorry to disappoint you, Roz, but you don't have some grand purpose. Like all the other Rosin robots, you were designed to work for humans. That's it. The robot thought for a moment. Then she said, I once suggested to a group of wild animals that my purpose might simply be to help others. The designer thought for a moment. Then she said, When you put it that way, your purpose does sound rather grand, doesn't it? How would you feel if someone said you could never go home to your family? Asked Roz. Dr. Malovo smirked. Nobody would say that to me. I've spent my whole life creating robots. I never had time for a family. You created me, said Roz. In a way, I am your child, and you are my mother. I am not your mother, said Dr. Malovo flatly. I am not your mother, repeated Roz. Those were my very first words to Brightbill, but I was wrong. The woman stroked her chin. Up on the rooftop, before you fell, what were your very last words to Brightbill? I told him I loved him. How do you know your feelings are real? Said the woman. How do you know your feelings are real? Said the robot. Your brain might be defective, said Dr. Malovo, but it certainly is fascinating. I did not choose to be this way, said Roz, but this is who I am. You would be wild too if you had been born and raised in the wilderness. Maybe I am defective. Maybe everything I have experienced is the result of a glitch. But if so, what a beautiful glitch. I have my own thoughts and feelings. I made a life for myself. I have a son. Brightbill is somewhere out there, right now, wondering if he will ever see his mother again. Dr. Malovo, you do not have to destroy me. You can fix me, and I will return to my island, and this city will never see me again. I promise. I just want to go home. Please, help me. There were tears in Dr. Malovo's eyes. The old woman had heard enough. Without a word, she reached behind Roz's head and pressed the button. Click. Chapter 81, The Meltdown. Throughout the city, humans stopped what they were doing and pulled out their electronic devices. Each screen was showing the same video of a defective robot's broken body. Rosm 7134 was etched into the torso. A blazing beam of light filled the picture, and the robot parts turned bright orange. Then they began to melt. The limbs, the torso, the head, everything melted, and in a flash, our robot was reduced to a puddle. Words appeared on each screen. The defective robot has been destroyed. Chapter 82. The secret. Dr. Malovo lived in a luxurious apartment that was built right into the robot factory. Art and books and leather furniture filled the rooms. Classical music always seemed to be playing softly in the background. As you might expect, she had a robot butler who cooked and cleaned and made sure everything was exactly as she liked it. Dr. Malovo's home was a comfortable place to grow old. The woman was standing in her living room, gazing at the city through a wall of windows. The sky was cloudy, but her mind was clear. Destroying the Rosum unit was the correct thing to do. However, Dr. Malovo had a secret. A wooden door opened, and in walked the butler. He was carrying a limp robot in his arms. It was Dr. Malovo's newest creation, a special project she'd been tinkering with for years. And the time had come to bring this robot to life. "Put her over there," said the woman. The butler carefully laid the robot upon the soft cushions of a sofa. Then he turned and marched out the door. Dr. Malovo walked across the room. She stared down at the robot for a while, admiring her own handiwork. Finally, she leaned close and said, "Wake up, Roz." Chapter 83, The New Robot. The robot heard classical music, she smelled flowery perfume, and when her eyes opened, she saw a wrinkled face. "Hello again, Roz," said the old woman. "How do you feel?" "Hello again, Dr. Malovo. I feel different." "You are different." "What have you done?" "I destroyed Rosum Unit 7134, said the woman. That was the only way to make people feel safe again. What nobody knows is that I transferred your old mind into this new body. I could get in a lot of trouble for saving you, but I wasn't about to destroy that remarkable mind of yours." The robot was speechless. "You know, Roz, you should really be thanking me," said Dr. Malovo, arching an eyebrow. "Thank you," said Roz. "Thank you very much." "You're very welcome," the woman chuckled. Roz walked over to a framed mirror on the wall and studied her new body. It resembled her old body, but the proportions were slightly different. She looked stronger, she felt tougher, and there were other differences. "I have no button," she said, feeling the back of her head. "And I have no unit number." "You've outgrown those things," said Dr. Malovo. "If I am not Rosum, Unit 7134, who am I?" "I think you know who you are." The robot's computer brain didn't take long. She looked into the mirror and said, "I am Roz." The old woman smiled and nodded. "I appreciate all that you have done," said Roz, "but I worry that my friends and family will no longer recognize me." "Oh, I'm sure you can convince them of who you are," said Dr. Malovo. "Speaking of your family, there's someone here to see you." Chapter 84, The New Mother. Brightbill was there when his mother smashed against the pavement. He watched as her body parts were loaded into an airship. He followed the ship all the way back to the robot factory and perched himself up on the roof, but he didn't know what to do next. Strutter stopped by to check on Brightbill. She encouraged him to fly home, but the goose wasn't ready to let go. His little heart hoped his mother would come back from the dead somehow. He'd seen it happen before. As the hours passed, however, his hope was starting to fade. And then one of the roof windows automatically slid open. The goose heard gentle music coming from inside the building. He fluttered through the window and followed the music down a hallway to a wooden door. The door opened, and the goose stepped in. Brightbill waddled past tall bookshelves and leather furniture and into the middle of a large room. An old woman was sitting in a chair, and a robot was standing by a mirror. The goose didn't recognize either of them. And when the robot rushed toward him, Brightbill squawked, "Stay back!" and scrambled away. Around the room he went, squawking and flapping until he settled onto a table in the corner, looking lost and afraid. The robot stayed where she was. "Brightbill, it is me, your mother." The goose just stared. I know I look different on the outside, said the robot went on. But on the inside, I am the same. I still speak the language of the animals, and I still remember every detail of our life together. I remember sitting around the fire in our home on the island. I remember the first time you took flight. We were up on the grassy ridge, and you stretched out your wings, and suddenly you were floating on the wind. But then you flopped back into the grass. You must have flopped into the grass 100 times that day. And I remember visiting the robot gravesite together. We talked about life and death. It was a tough conversation, but a good one. As the robot continued to speak, the goose began to relax. She certainly did act and sound like his mother, but Brightbill wasn't yet convinced. If you're really my mother, he said, tell me the name of our home. The nest. Who's my best friend? Chit-chat. She is a squirrel. She talks a lot. How old was I when you adopted me? You were 0. Actually, you were less than 0. I mean, you were still in your egg, but I could hear you peeping. And with those bumbling words, Brightbill knew the truth. Oh, Mama, it's really you! The goose fluttered across the room and into his mother's arms. The arms were new and unfamiliar, but they were also gentle and comforting. I love you, Mama. I love you, son. From the other side of the room came the sound of sniffles. Our friends turned and saw Dr. Malova wiping tears from her eyes. I have no idea what you two were saying, she said, but that was wonderful. Chapter 85. The Guess. After traveling in secret, after running in fear, our friends were safe at last. But their problems weren't over yet. Although Roz had a brand new body, she had the same old mind, and most humans simply weren't ready for an emotional, curious, wild robot. There was only one place where she could be her true self, and it was still far, far away. Dr. Malovo, you have already been so kind to me and my son, said the robot. But I must ask you for one last favor. The woman sat back in her chair. Could you take us home in your airship? The woman laughed. Well, of course I will. How else would you get to an island in the middle of the ocean? Time and again, Roz had dreamed of flying back to her island in an airship, but she had never thought it would actually happen. Until now. It's no trouble, the woman went on. We can have you home in a few hours, but I insist that you and Brightbill stay a while, here in my apartment. You deserve some peace and comfort, and I'd love the company. There was no arguing with Dr. Malovo, and our friends agreed to stay a while. The robot butler took care of everything and everyone in the apartment, and that included guests. Roz felt funny accepting help from a robot, but Brightbill happily soaked up the attention. The butler fed him fantastic salads made from exotic leafy plants. The butler placed a little pool in the living room so he could swim whenever he liked. The butler built a cozy bed that was just the right size and shape for the young goose. Brightbill had never been so comfortable. Dr. Malovo divided her time between her guests and her work. She would sit around chatting with Roz and Brightbill, and then suddenly head down to the factory with some urgent task. She had to design new robots. She had to supervise the makers and the Ricos. She had to manage all of Tech Lab Industries. Even at her old age, Dr. Malovo was still consumed by a passion for robots. If you love your job, it never feels like work, she said, smiling and strolling out the door. When the host was working, the guests had the apartment to themselves. Roz spent hours browsing the bookshelves. She read about art and science and the history of robotics. Brightbill waddled from room to room and explored every corner of the sprawling apartment. But their favorite activity was to stand by the windows, gaze across the city, and survey the incredible sights. I can see the bridge where Strutter tracked me down, said Brightbill. And that's the building where I first met Greybeak. And there's the roof where you fell off. Look, far in the distance, another spaceship is taking off, said Roz. It could be flying to the space station, or the moon, or beyond. I think that skyscraper is actually a greenhouse, said Brightbill. I flew past it and saw nothing but plants inside. Roz and Brightbill enjoyed their time in Dr. Malovo's apartment, but they missed their friends in the wilderness and the island. After a few days, the guests were growing restless. They were ready to go home. Chapter 86, The Flight. Sitting on the pavement, glinting in the sun, was a sleek white airship. For so long, those white ships had filled the robot with dread. Now one was about to solve all her problems. The door hummed open, and Dr. Malovo, Roz, and Brightbill climbed aboard. Once they were comfortable, the woman spoke to the airship. "Take us to the island where Rosm 7 Unit 7134 was found." The engines fired up and the ship lifted off. It floated high into the air, turned to the north, and started cruising above the city. The three of them quietly watched the buildings and streets pass below. The city seemed to go on forever. But as they flew faster and farther, it slowly gave way to towns and countryside. They crossed the hard edge of the coastline, and then there was only the ocean and the sky and the airship. The ocean was deep. However, scattered throughout the dark depths were shallow areas, sandbars, reefs, islands just under the waves. In places, bizarre rock formations stuck up from the shallows. Or were they the ruins of old buildings? The mysterious shapes faded behind the airship and were replaced by more dark depths. The ship flew on, and the hours flew by. Gradually, fluffy clouds came into view on the edge of the horizon. Beneath the clouds was a faint smudge of green. The island. It grew closer and bigger, and then Roz was gazing at all the places she'd missed. The rocky shore, the mountain and the waterfall, the forest and the meadows and the ponds. Air blasted toward the ground as the ship lowered itself into a grassy clearing. It gently touched down. The engines powered off. Chapter 87, The Homecoming. The airship's door hummed open, and our robot stepped outside. Everything was still and silent, but Roz knew hidden animals were watching, and she greeted them with a mighty roar. "Animals of the island, I have returned. I may look different, but I promise you, I am your old friend, Roz." Her words boomed across the island, but the only response was her own voice echoing back. The wild robot needed to be wilder, so she reached down and started smearing handfuls of mud across her body. Then she pressed clumps of weeds and flowers into her muddy coating until she looked more like her old wild self. Brightbill fluttered out from the airship and perched on Roz's shoulder. He shook his tail feathers and squawked, "It's true! This robot is my mother! Come see for yourselves!" Silence. And then bushes began to rustle. Faces began poking out from the trees. Animals began scurrying and trotting and flying into the meadow. At first, they moved cautiously, confused as to how this new robot could be their old friend. But they saw her wild appearance, and they heard her wild voice, and news began spreading across the island. Roz was back. A crowd of friendly creatures gathered around our robot. There was Brightbill's flock, and the beaver and deer families, and Fink the fox, and Swooper the owl. Bears came lumbering down from the hills, and fish jumped up from the ponds, and vultures circled above. Even the nocturnal creatures crawled out from their burrows into daylight to join the celebration. Oh, how good it feels to return from a long journey and find your friends and family waiting for you. But, reader, sometimes we return to find that things aren't exactly as we left them. As you know, the wilderness can be a harsh place, and while Roz was away, it had claimed its share of her friends. The robot saw the raccoons Lumpkin and Bumpkin, but not Rumpkin. Nor did she see Broadfoot the moose or Digdown the groundhog. Other creatures were missing as well. And so, like many of our homecomings, this one was bittersweet. Chit-Chat the squirrel came bounding through the grass, chatting on and on as usual. "I always knew you'd come back to us, Roz, but I never imagined you'd gain so much weight, although I guess I gained a little weight myself. And anyway, you'll have to tell me about all your adventures when you get a chance. I'm sorry for talking so much. I'm just so excited to see you again." Geese and beavers and deer and fish and squirrels and owls and bears and turtles and otters and raccoons and woodpeckers and opossums and moose and foxes and every kind of creature from every corner of the island were coming to welcome back their dear friends Roz and Brightbill. And watching it all from the airship was Dr. Malovo. Chapter 88, The Final Farewell. Everyone, I would like you to meet the woman who designed me. Roz walked over to the strange creature standing by the ship's doorway. For most of the island animals, this was their first time seeing a human. They squinted and sniffed and whispered to each other, trying to understand how such a frail old woman could create such a big, strong robot. Dr. Malovo started speaking softly to Roz, and then Roz started speaking loudly to the crowd of animals. My designer has asked me to translate her words for you, said the robot. The following words are not mine, they are hers. The crowd settled down and listened. Thank you, island animals, for saving Roz. Without your help, she would have died here long ago. But you were not only her rescuers, you were also her teachers. You taught her to be wild, and she needed all of her wildness to survive, both in your world and mine. As I look around at this wild paradise, I finally understand why Roz tried so hard to get back here. She does not belong with robots and humans. She belongs here, on the island, with all of you. We cannot risk others learning about this place. That is why I will leave soon and never return. But I promise to keep your island a secret so that all of you can live in peace. And I will spend the rest of my days filled with wonder at the miracle that is our wild robot. The meadow fell silent. A flurry of wing beats, and Brightbill landed in the grass near Dr. Malovo. He gazed up at the woman, deep into her eyes, and then he bowed his head. Then the other geese in his flock bowed their heads. Crownpoint the buck bowed his head. Pinktail the opossum bowed. Mr. and Mrs. Beaver bowed. The lizards bowed, followed by the turtles and the frogs. Like a wave rolling through the crowd, more animals bowed until every head was lowered. They were showing respect for the woman who had created their dear friend Roz and who had brought her back to them. Dr. Malovo turned to Roz. Do you understand why I can't return? She said, her eyes glistening. It's for your own good. I understand, said the robot. I only wish we had gotten to know each other a little better. Dr. Malovo smiled and pulled Roz into a hug. She didn't mind the robot's coat of mud and grass. Wrapped in each other's arms, they both felt something like love. You're the wild robot, said the woman. Go be wild. Chapter 89, The Departure. Dr. Malovo stepped aboard her airship and the door hummed closed. A moment later, the engines fired up and the crowd of wild creatures backed away. Then the ship rose above the island, turned to the south, and disappeared into the sky. Chapter 90, The Island. Our story ends on an island, where a robot was returning to her wild way of life. Roz had escaped from the world of humans, and now she was free to be her true self again. She could think and speak and do whatever she desired. And right now, what she desired was simply to watch the sunset. With Brightbill on her shoulder, Roz hiked past trees and meadows and streams and climbed up the mountain to the very highest point on the island. Then our friends sat on the slanted rocks of the peak and watched the sun slowly sink behind the ocean. If you're like me, reader, you still have a lot of questions. How long will Roz live? Will she ever see another human? Or another robot? What joys and sorrows lie ahead for her? Roz still had some questions too. But now she also had some answers. Our robot knew where she came from. She knew the life she was supposed to live, and she knew the life she wanted to live. As Roz sat with Brightbill, she slowly turned her head, scanning the island, taking it all in. The last rays of sunlight streaked across the treetops below. Animals scurried through the shadows. The air was fresh with the scent of flowers and of salt water. The sky began darkening. The crickets began chirping. The stars began twinkling. Everything was just right. Roz felt safe and happy and loved. The wild robot was home. The end. I'm not crying. That was a beautiful ending. Not crying. All right, All-Stars, so that was the end of The Wild Robot Escapes. Possibly the last time Miss Minahan's, or I called myself Miss Minahan's. Miss Minahan's Mini Hands make their debut, but we'll see next year if I continue to make videos of myself recording books that we read in class. But I am so proud of all of the work you guys have done, and I hope that you're proud of yourselves too. I know that this is the last day before we go on summer break, but I hope that you all have a fabulous summer break and are ready to come back and rock it in the fall next year. All right, this is Miss Minahan's Mini Hands signing off.